So you want to get into precision shooting, but you're on a bit of a budget, which is understandably so. Everything on the market nowadays is ruthlessly expensive and somewhat almost unobtainable. But you can spend around $700 that the Bushnell Match Pro ED 5 to 30 by 56 costs, and you are curious to see if this is really the best bang for your buck or if it will work well for your needs. Well, look no further, my friend. This extremely long video is going to help you decide whether or not this is going to be potentially the right scope for you. So pour yourself a drink, make yourself some popcorn, get yourself some lotion and some paper towels. We're about to go into this thing head first. But first, let's take a look at this thing's overall fit and finish. This is the Bushnell Match Pro ED 5 to 30 by 56. This was graciously sent in by someone on the internet that loves my reviews and says they're the best ever. Or at least, that's what I'm going to say that they said. There was no box with this, unfortunately. They misplaced it and instead sent it in an Arkin EP5 box, which when I first opened it, I went, who the hell sent me an Arkin? Then I opened it and my expectations were averted, ladies and gentlemen, because I found this inside. These have been touted lately as being incredible. And I will say this, for the 30 seconds that I was playing around with it, looking through it, I don't know why you would buy the XRS III for more than twice the price of this $800-ish HPVO, because this thing so far seems to be better than that in every way, shape, and form. First thing you gotta know is these are made in China. Right there at the bottom, there is our model number and everything else that you're going to need to know. Unfortunately, there's nothing else that I could really pull from to help educate you with this. But we're going to start off at the back with the fast focus eyepiece. Has a little bit of grinding in there. The gentleman does shoot long-range precision, and God only knows how much wear and tear this thing has seen. Anyway, all the way out. Quarter turn in. There is some play to this, but again, not out of the realm of acceptable. Nice rubberized coating on this. It gives a good purchase, and if you were to put a cap on this, it would probably go and stay on there nice and tight. The magnification on this ring goes from 5 at 12 o'clock to 30 at 6 o'clock, so a very standard 180-degree throw. Does come with this little cattail. You might be able to hear a little bit of rubbing inside, but that's just the surfaces between the actual rear ocular housing and the magnification ring probably rubbing up against one another. It is very smooth and quiet nonetheless, and feels really well damped. Cattail makes adjusting this thing a breeze. As for the illumination control, we have a maximum of 11, but it doesn't go 11 and then off. It's 11, then off, going back to 10 or towards 10, all the way to 1, and then an off at that side. I don't know why they just didn't choose to have an off on either extremes, but that's just a personal preference of mine. Anyway. Pretty tight in the lockup. It does sort of just roll out of the detent into the next. There is an off towards the middle between 6 and 7. I'm assuming that's going to be for lower light environments like at nighttime, and then 7 up will be more for your daytime brightness. As far as removing the battery compartment cover, you'll see it right there. This will probably be a little bit easier because it has a hard stop on it, but this is a very small little lip, and I don't know. Yeah, this needs, Bushnell, if you're watching, remove your B or put it somewhere else and put a little slot there for a coin. This is a real pain in the balls, because if this thing gets locked up really tight, you're going to have to take a flathead screwdriver or a pair of pliers and mar this thing up trying to open it. We have a fairly inexpensive looking battery compartment inside. The 3 dimples is standard on more or less lower priced products, but I've never had a problem with these before. So I'd rather see a battery compartment like that just works even though it's really cheap, and then have the money saved from going with that towards something else like, let's say, the glass. To all my rimfire shooters out there, you'll love to see the 15-yard minimum side focus. Goes all the way up to infinity, and you can see it's just over 180 degrees full throw. I will say this, that the spline on this is very aggressive. This is very, very coarse on the side. So you really get a good purchase on this without much effort. It's actually quite sharp. It's much different from the illumination control, which is good because you don't have to worry about going which one is which in a hurry. You just, okay, that's it. Properly damped, perfectly smooth, one extreme to the next, and absolutely silent. Fantastic. Again, unlike the XRS III, both the elevation and windage are locking. Why wouldn't they put that on basically their flagship optic, but on their middle range stuff, it's got it? I don't know. Anyway, I'm very happy to see that this thing has both lock and windage and elevation. There's no reason not to have locks on all your stuff unless it's a dedicated like F-class scope. Really good sound and feel, a little bit of play, but I suspect that's just from their locking mechanism. You can actually hear it. Is that a problem? Absolutely not. And again, unlike the Stryker the Delta Stryker that we just looked at, or maybe we're looking at this first. Anyway, the Delta Stryker does not have this. It doesn't have that little line going from the body to the cap. There's a big gap in there, so if you go make an adjustment real quick, you can't instantaneously see like you can on this. Oh, I went 0.3 of a mil. Lock it up. We're good to go. Lock on this. Very solid, easy to engage and disengage. I love it, Bushnell. The same can be said for the elevation knob. Wonderful. Wonderful. One full mil, or one full turn, I should say. Two full turns. There's our little rotational indicator up on top. I'm sorry I had that covered. And we got just over 21 mils. So let's go back close to one. Watch the little nub on top. It's going to go shwump. And we're good to go. These sound and feel really, really good. And again, the fact that they're locking is wonderful. While we're here, let's see what these erectors look like. I'm going to use a Vortex tool for this. There we go. This is not captive in there. You can remove this, and once we do, see a nice old O-ring in there. Looking inside, to set zero stop, rotate. So we got to, sorry, I should really recenter that. Put it in there, and then just twist that to set up your zero stop. We got a giant brass part of the erector. The inside is beautifully machined and pinned. Are those pins? Yeah, that's pinned. Wow. Isn't that something to admire? As far as the anodizing on this thing, it's pretty even. There are a couple of love marks on this, which leads me to believe that it's not overly thick. But again, what do you expect for the price point that this thing comes in at? $600-800-ish. It sounds pretty solid for what it is, and I'm perfectly fine with that. The first or front focal plane reticle seen here is the Deploy 2. I like it. The scaling here at 5x is beautiful. You can see those posts at 3, 6, and 9 really draw your eye towards the center, where you see that really quite large Christmas tree style reticle quite well. We do see some of the scope body, but it's really not that bad. It's right in between something like a Razor HD and most of the competitors that you'll ever look through. It's just enough to know that you are perfectly behind it if you're the type of person that likes seeing some of the scope body, but not so much so like if you're like me, it becomes really obtrusive. At its maximum of 30x, you can see that reticle really becomes well defined, but it does have some darkening in the shadows, which we are going to take a closer look at throughout this video. The illumination on this thing is very, very nice given this magnification range. From my experiences, having illumination on an HPVO like this is really nice when you're shooting at farther targets that are in shadows or don't have that much contrast on them. It's really nice to have as an option because guess what? You might need it. And at least here, the illumination is fantastic. The sound, feel, and lock on this turret is really, really nice for the price point. There is a little bit of play on it when I wiggle the turret side to side, but I wonder if that was just on this scope. Good sounding and feeling turrets are one thing, but does it track properly? Let's find that out. First, real quick, the deploy to reticle lines up to my target perfectly, so let's see if that thing tracks as good as it looks. I start by doing a little step test, which is up and to the left. So, once we get 4 mils over and 4 mils up, how does it line up? Well, it lines up pretty good. It's about 1/10 of a mil off on the windage once we get over there, but it resets to 0 perfectly fine. So, locking that turret, let's continue up to 10 mils.
Perfect. Our windage now favoring, again, about 1/2 of a mil, which is almost nothing.
Just about 1/10 of a mil off on the windage, but perfect on the elevation gain when we go from 0 to 10 mils plus. And when we reset the 0 back on the elevation, you can see there's about that 1/10 of a mil that's off. Increasing it back up to about 10 mils, it's just ever so slightly off. But ever so slightly off. Keep in mind, this is still a very budget-minded optic. This is not supposed to be a $2,000 to $3,000 super precision scope. This is designed to be a certain price point. And in that price point, it performs extremely well. And there's no slop to the erectors, as you can see here. I do about 2/10 in either direction, up, down, left, right, and there's no play. It lines up perfectly back to 0 where we started, and as you can see, the illumination down here doesn't look half bad either. We've touched so far on many different aspects of this scope, but it's on to perhaps one of the most important parts, which is going to be the overall optic clarity. This is very important, as is, well, everything else when it comes to precision rifle scopes. You can't really have a precision scope if it doesn't track properly, but if it looks like shit, then it's not really going to perform all that well. Focusing our attention on a 30-yard power transformer, the parallax is roughly set to where it's indicated at the distance here, and as you can very clearly see, it looks really good. I try to fine-tune the side focus to see if maybe I can get a little bit more image clarity out of it, but really, there isn't much more I can get. So it's nice to know that the side focus numbers actually seem to line up so far with where we are. Illumination here on a very bright sunny day is just noticeable to see that there's some red to the reticle, which again is more than sufficient for a scope like this. If you're shooting on a very dark target in a very dark shadowy area, that red is going to be just enough to have it pop out enough so you can see where the reticle is and where the target is. It's wonderful. Let's back out the magnification somewhat and focus our attention on our 400-yard brick building. Pulling it out to, I can't remember where this is, probably about 15 to 10x, somewhere in that range, we scroll down very slowly and focus our attention at a much farther target. As you can see here, that tree, which is about 10 yards away, is kind of in focus, but everything beyond that is out of focus. So the depth of field on the side focus on this thing, even at lower magnifications, is pretty significant. What that means is if you're focusing on a particular distance at a particular target and you get the side focus just right, that plane of existence is basically going to be what's in focus. Some people like this, some people don't. I once again set the side focus to about the 400-yard mark to see if when we increase the magnification, if it's going to be accurate or not. I know for many people, they don't ever look at those numbers. They don't care about the numbers. In fact, they prefer that the numbers not be there. As for myself, if it actually lines up and makes sense, then you could use it as a real quick, rough ranging guide. That's something that interests me, because if I want to get in the ballpark of what distance I'm at before I start doing any sort of calculations, I can do that on the fly rather quickly. Increase the magnification to 30x, and you can see that we're just ever so slightly off. It was about 5% off. I think I touched it up to about like 315 or so. Really not that far off. And again, as a rough ranging guide, it's pretty damn good. As far as the image quality, we have a lot going on here. When the shadows come in from the clouds, you can see some chromatic aberration creeping up on that air vent on the very top of that parapet wall. But when the sun comes out, we lose most of the chromatic aberration entirely. Contrast on those bricks seems very high to my eye, both behind the camera and to the naked eye. I extensively test these scopes. I usually put them on a rifle and shoot them for a few hours over the course of multiple days in different environments to really get a feel for it. And I never got tired behind the MPED. It always seemed to just be effortless to get behind and use, no matter what the occasion was, no matter what the time was. There is something we need to talk about, and that's the darkening to the edge of the image. Backing it out to about 25x, you can see the image gets much brighter overall, especially in the corners. Not only does it get brighter, but it also gets much easier to get behind because the exit pupil increases that much larger. We'll touch on Eyebox soon, but at 30x it becomes extremely tight. But this is a 5 to 30 and it's kind of expected, especially for the price point. However, that does not mean that the overall max magnification of 30x is unusable on this thing. No, actually far from it. If you have a perfect cheek weld, even in lower light environments, it's still usable. It's just not as user-friendly as backing down the magnification slightly to 25, let's say, or roughly where we are right now, which is 15 to 20x. If you're worried about this right now at this moment in time in this video, don't be. Any 30x magnified scope that I've gotten behind recently is going to perform more or less about the same. The Eyebox is just going to get tight. And it's going to get tight on almost any scope at its maximum magnification. It's just on a 30x like this, it is going to be a little bit more noticeable, again, just because we have more magnification. When you get behind a telescope, you really got to get your eye perfectly behind it, right? Same sort of principle applies here. Let's now focus on a much farther target, the 900-yard power tower. I set my side focus again to roughly 900 yards before I increased the magnification to its maximum. And happily, again, it's really, really close. It's not perfect, but it's really close. So if you want to use the side focus as a rough ranging guide, you can. It's certainly not perfect, but it's closer than most, I would say. Having the side focus go down to such a close distance like 30 yards is going to be great for all you F-class rimfire shooters. Because if you're like me and you like shooting rimfire, sometimes you're not shooting at, a couple hundreds of yards. Sometimes you're keeping it well inside 50 yards. So having the ability to focus this thing down really close is really, really nice, especially having this magnification range that's going to actually be usable. At 30x, yes, the image does have a little bit of darkening to it. Again, like I said earlier, you got to be 100% perfectly behind it to actually use it at its maximum magnification. And let me now start shifting the camera side to side to give you a better sense of what I'm talking about. If you touch it ever so slightly in one direction or the other, the image really starts to darken up quickly. Happily, at least both the image of the target and the reticle stay sharp until you can't look out of it anymore. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten behind a scope where the image stability, as I'm calling it, really tapers off quickly. Basically, if you're not 100% perfectly behind it, it falls to crap. At about 25x, the image does improve and the exit pupil does get much larger. It's a much more usable magnification as opposed to 30x if you want to get behind it in a not so perfect sort of position. And that's perfectly fine, because if you're using a 5 to 25, it's going to be about the same as this 5 to 30 at 25x. In fact, it might be a little bit better. Backing it out to about 10x, it gets only better. And rightfully so, given the fact that it's less than half the overall magnification that this thing has capacity of. So if you want to use it in a more dynamic role, the 10x is more than usable on this thing. Backing it out to its minimum, you've probably already guessed it before I even show it, it's better still. Anytime you go to the minimum power of any sort of magnified optic, the lower magnifications are probably going to be a little bit better than the upper magnifications when it comes to the overall exit pupil size and Eyebox. From a more dynamic position, you might see exactly what I'm talking about. At 5x here, you can see we have plenty of room in and out and side to side on this thing. Getting behind it is not that challenging, no matter what the position is. The illumination is very easy to pick up, but because it is first focal plane, you cannot see it in the shadows. That is a trick that is reserved for second focal plane scopes, so don't expect much more out of this. Increasing the magnification to 10x here, you will see if you've ever done this before with your scope at home, whether it be a fixed 10x or another variable powered and you put it to 10x, it might not be as good as this. This is a very good performance. It's a very forgiving Eyebox. We have a very large view looking through it. The field of view is fantastic, and it's just easy to get behind. Part of that has to do with just the overall size of this thing. It's long, it's got a very large front objective, and it's got pretty good glass in it so far. So the 10x is very good. 20x gets more of what you might expect in the higher magnification ranges. But again, we could still dance around this thing and still have a pretty good looking view through this thing, despite the fact that we are under less than optimal light conditions. That plays a pivotal role, because the more light we have, the better the image would be and the better the Eyebox would be. Despite the fact it's overcast and the sun's already gone down, basically, being able to still get behind it at 20x is very impressive. And the fact that we could still use it here at 30x, yeah, it's very tight and challenging to get behind it for the perfect position. It's still a very good performance overall, despite the fact that we have less than perfect lighting at our disposal. This is a very good performance. Typically, 56mm front objectives really do let in a lot more light, but it's still down to the quality and clarity of the glass that makes the biggest difference. Let's get back to a brighter, sunnier environment and focus on a 1,000-yard target. At 30x, you can see the image is pretty good at this distance. This is pretty far. This is stretching it for anybody. When I filmed this, it was the tail end of the summer, so the mirage is still pretty high, and the air quality still wasn't 100%. I'm not giving the scope any excuses. I'm just letting you know why it might not be as clear as it possibly could be. Typically, the hotter the air, the more mirage you're going to have. That's a given, but also the possibility of more pollutants in the air causing the image to not look as good. But regardless of that, it's a pretty decent image. But that's at 0 mils. I add my standard of plus 10 mils, get back on target, and see if there's any real difference between the images without any mils dialed in and with 10 mils plus. Here, the image is pretty good. I adjust the side focus though to see if I can get a little bit more out of it, and I really do think I extracted a couple of percent as far as overall sharpness goes. I find the image here to be more than usable. It's got good sharpness, even though the contrast seems to be tapering down a little bit. The biggest issue is the overall brightness to it, like I said earlier. At 30x, it really does limit the amount of light coming through. Backing it down to about 25x indicated here, the image sharpens up, it brightens up. As a result of that, the contrast goes up a little bit as well. Our final talking point before we get into some comparisons is going to be its overall light gathering ability in a much darker environment. Now, we already basically touched on this a little bit with the Eyebox test, but that wasn't as dark as I like to go when it comes to testing in, frankly, a darker environment. We've already seen that the 30x so far seems slightly handicapped, but I want to see if it really makes a difference here in a much lower light environment. Illumination on this thing, as you already saw as I cycled through it, is more than bright enough. I'm in like one of the middle settings here, and it is just the perfect amount of illumination just to be able to pick it up, but not so much so that it closes down your iris and thus you can't see as well through it. Bringing it all the way up to its maximum of 30x, the image isn't really that much different, but I will maintain when you get behind this thing with your naked eye, it's much harder to keep that perfect center line to be able to look through it 100%. And that's, again, just because of the overall ambient light that's coming through this. Backing it out at 25x, it is wonderful, though. Truly, truly wonderful. In fact, I think it performs better than most 5 to 25s when it comes to its overall capacity in this form. Enough of that dreary drab, let's get into the side-by-side comparisons. And boy howdy, this will make you appreciate this thing if it hasn't already done so. On the left will be the MPED, the Match Pro ED. ED stands for, by the way, extra delicious. On the right, we're going to start with the Tract Toric 4.5 to 30. You guys haven't seen this yet, but it's coming to the channel. First thing you got to take note of is just the view looking through both of these. It is monstrous getting behind an MPED, compared to basically almost everything I'm going to compare it to. But for right off the bat, the Tract Toric, there's no comparison between these two as far as the view looking through it. As far as the overall image quality, the Tract Toric manages a fairly good image, but it seems flatter. The colors don't seem as vibrant. It doesn't seem to have as much contrast to my eye. I'm not the biggest fan of it, especially when you factor in that it's more than twice the price of the MPED usually. Now, granted, the image on the Toric, it does seem a little hazy. That was when we had those crazy Canadian wildfires coming in. Yes, I've had this for quite some time, but I've been ruthlessly delayed. As far as the overall field of view, at their minimums, they're basically the same. 24.5 feet for the MPED, 24.7 feet for the Toric, and that's with the Toric being rated at 4.5x minimum, not 5x like the MPED. Makes you wonder what's really going on here. Another number I could throw at you guys real quick is going to be the weight. The MPED comes in about 32 ounces. The Toric claims about 41.5 ounces. So it is much heavier. They are made in Japan. Externally, the Torics feel phenomenal. Well above their price point. If you are military LEO, they do offer some substantial price savings. But do I think it's worth it? Only you could really answer that. You're going to have to wait for the full review on the Toric. But here, side by side, yeah, I know it's a little bit of an unfair advantage because with the MPED, I had basically perfect weather. With the Toric, I definitely had a lot of smoke coming in, but c'est la vie, such is life. However, numbers only mean so much. My experience getting behind both of these is a completely different story. The Toric never really seemed as special, and as you could see here, side-to-side shifting was even tighter than the M-Ped. The M-Ped really does punch above its price point, and here it really shows. It is the choice I would make of these two. Next up is a scope that I teased a long time ago, and I'm really, really sorry for everyone that's looking forward to the Delta Stryker HD 4.5 to 30 review. I know, it's coming, but so is the Great Flood. Just like the Toric, we have a much smaller view looking through the Stryker. However, we did have clearer skies, and thus the contrast and colors are going to be a little bit more up to snuff to compete against the M-Ped, and sure enough, they do. But again, there's a lot going on with the Stryker I'm not the biggest fan of. No surprise there. What do I mean by that? The Stryker and the Toric are basically twins, with the exception of the weight. The turrets are a completely different setup, but the overall size and shape of everything, and the view looking through it, and the style of the glass as far as how it works, like when you actually get behind it and use the damn thing, they're really, really similar. Almost too similar. Almost to the point where I think that they might actually share a lot of the same DNA. Except for the reticles. The reticle on the Stryker, I do not like this particular one. They do offer some other style of reticles, but I prefer the Deploy 2 in the M-Ped over the Stryker HD. Again, field of view is going to be the exact same as it was with the Toric, 24.7 versus 24.5 with the M-Ped here at their minimums. But which one has a bigger view? Despite the fact that the M-Ped has technically half an X larger minimum magnification as opposed to the Stryker, it's basically got, as near as makes no difference, the exact same field of view at the minimum magnification. At the top end, the M-Ped actually has larger. I don't think I mentioned it with the Toric. The Toric at 30 is rated at 3.7. Here with the Delta, it is rated at 3.8. And with the M-Ped, it's rated, guess what, at 4.1. And it shows right here, even though my center point is not in the exact same position, it's slightly off, you can see we see a lot more through the M-Ped. Also, look at the darkening to the edges on the Stryker. I had a very similar experience with the Toric, and that's as good as it gets. It's a very bright, sunny day, but the Stryker really didn't perform all that well. The M-Ped, though, running really strong. Overall image clarity, sharpness, and color-wise, I would say that both of these are fairly even keel. Even though, again, the Stryker comes in over double the price of the M-Ped, but it is made in Japan, and that might mean a lot for a lot of you out there. As far as the weight, it's 4 ounces heavier than the M-Ped, but look at how tight that Eyebox is at 30x. It's really, really tight, to the point where it's almost unusable. And the turrets, I don't like them as much as the M-Ped. So guess what? It's the M-Ped yet again. The moment you've all been waiting for. If you're familiar of the budget HPVO landscape, you can't talk about it without mentioning the PST Gen 2 from Vortex. This is, however, the only 5 to 25 throughout this entire review, but that doesn't make it any less of a scope. This comes in a little bit more expensive than the M-Ped, but you can find them to the point where it's basically about the same price point. But these aren't technically the same scopes. The PST does not have locking turrets, but it's got really nice turrets. It's also got a 30mm tube. It's also got a 50mm objective. So out of all of the scopes here, the PST2 is technically the smallest, but it's also just about the lightest by about 0.8 of an ounce over the M-Ped. But it's also got the smallest tube, which means it's not going to have the exact same amount of internal elevation gain, and it might not let in the same amount of light because it's only a 50mm front objective. But they are made in the Philippines. The field of view is about on par with the PST. At its minimum, it's 24.1 feet versus 24.5 feet. And at its maximum, it is going to give us much more. It's going to give us 4.8 as opposed to 4.1, but it's only 25x as opposed to 30x. And what that 5x difference is going to look like is this right here at 100 yards. That is quite noticeable. But for many of you, you might say to yourself, yeah, but I don't really need to shoot out that far, and does 5x really make that much of a difference here, given that they're both their maximum at 100 yards? Well, that's up to you to decide. I would, however, say that the image might actually go to the PST on this one. There's a little bit less chromatic aberration to my eye, and you might prefer the PST for a number of reasons. Let's say you're looking to build a trainer, and you already have a Gen 2 Razor HD, and you have the exact same reticle in both the PST Gen 2 and the Razor HD Gen 2. So it technically makes sense from a logistics standpoint to go with the PST because it's more set up for a proper trainer for your precision rig. Well, if that's something that resonates with you, then the PST is going to be the choice for you. But if you're looking at this solely as buying one of these for whatever, precision rig, fun rig, budget rig, whatever rig you want to buy, then it really comes down to having a lot of other different factors. Locking turrets being one of them, the extra 5x being one of them. The weight, they're basically the same as nears makes no difference. Maybe you want the larger front objective and the larger tube to let in a little bit more light or have a little bit more throw on your erectors. By the way, these were filmed on the exact same day using the exact same camera settings, and you can very clearly see the MPED is brighter. Granted, it is during the day, but that will directly translate into lower light environments where the MPED will let in more light than the PST. As far as from an external standpoint, there are some different features from both of these scopes that would lead me to go with one versus the other. I prefer locking turrets, MPED. I prefer having a cattail already instead of having to buy a throw lever, MPED. But I do like the overall controls on the PST. Just because it's an older model doesn't necessarily mean it's bad or worse. It's still very capable, but I feel it's more capable of like a bench gun, as opposed to possibly a more utility gun, given the fact that you can lock the turrets. I'm a big fan of locking turrets or capped windages because it's not going to go anywhere unless I want it to go there. Here, again, both of these are at their maximums with the exact same camera settings, though the sun did shift a little bit, and it's going to make the MPED look a little bit brighter. But even so, in those shadows, the MPED still looks a little bit better, even though there is more chromatic aberration in the high contrast areas as opposed to with the PST. But again, this is at 30x on the MPED versus 25 on the PST. If I back out the MPED to 25, it only gets even better. So you got to take that into consideration. As for which one of these I would personally take, I'd probably go with the MPED if I didn't have a razor that matches the same reticle in the PST. If I have that setup, where this could possibly go on a trainer, it's going to go for the PST. It really is a wash. On to the most interesting comparison. The Bushnell XRS III is the MPED's bigger, much more expensive brother. It comes in about the exact same price as the Toric and the Stryker, right around $1,500. It's a 6-36, which means that it does have more magnification than the MPED, but does it mean that it's better than the MPED? I don't know. Let's find out together. Its minimum field of view is 18 feet, as opposed to the 24.5 feet with the MPED, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is 1x difference. Tie that in with the fact that the view looking through the XRS III is significantly smaller than the MPED. No surprise there, it kind of looks exactly like what we saw with the Toric and the Stryker. It's also made in Japan, which is frustrating because I like stuff that comes out of Japan. But with this, the XRS III, I had the exact same time as the G3 Razor, and there was no comparison there. And guess what? There's no comparison here. Everything about the MPED, in my opinion, in my findings, in my belief, in my concept and mindset, is better with the MPED. Maybe not in overall durability. Maybe the XRS can withstand being on top of a Canon, whereas the MPED can max out at a 308. I can't vouch for that because I don't have the overall longevity and personal experience with that. So I'm not going to go here and bullshit you guys saying, oh, the MPED will outlast the XRS III for eternity, to infinity and beyond. I don't know. I don't want to claim I know. I don't even want to pretend that I know. But everything that I've had with the MPED so far leads me to believe that it might hold up for most range uses. If not, you're going to be testing out that warranty. But guess what? There's no reason why the XRS III would outlast the MPED. Granted, yes, one is made in Japan versus China, and for many people, myself included, I like buying stuff from a first world country, or at least not a communist country, but let's not get into a political shitstorm right now. Let's instead get into the optical clarity of what we're looking at between these two. These are filmed on the exact same range, at the exact same distances, granted at different times, but which one of these images looks better to you? Yes, there is 6x more on the XRS III, and it does show. We can see closer in on the range here at 200 yards. We do have only 3 feet field of view with the XRS, but with the MPED, again, that 4.1 feet does allow us to see a lot more. Yes, we could back out the XRS III to about 30, but then we still have a much less usable bottom end. Is there a comparison between these two that could really be made? Yes. Which one do I prefer? The MPED. The XRS III I didn't like at all. Again, it doesn't have locked-in turrets, and for me, that's a big no-no. You bench guys might be going, yes, but I want the extra magnification. If you want that, go for it. But I don't think just because you have more magnification or a Japanese-made scope or a scope that costs twice as much as the other, that you're getting twice as much scope. In fact, I beg the question, are you really even getting that much more? I don't think so. I think you're just getting a much more expensive scope. Again, could that come down to the internals? Will the XRS withstand a decade of abuse being thrown out of helicopters? Maybe, but I can't talk on that with any sort of honesty because I don't have that information. I didn't test either of these to that level. But regardless to that, I'd still take the MPED, even if the XRS does withstand more. And if I needed something to withstand even more abuse, I have a lot of trust in the Razor series of scopes from Vortex, specifically the G3. The G3 is another 6-36, but we get much larger field of view at its minimum magnification of 6x, 21 feet versus 24.5 feet. But look at the view looking through the G3 as opposed to the MPED. It's a little bit larger. So despite the fact that we have more magnification at its minimum, we have a much larger view looking through the G3 as opposed to every other competitor to the MPED, with the exception of the PST. The PST Gen 2 really does hold its own, but that does play dividends in with the overall eye relief. The eye relief on some of the scopes with a smaller view looking through it is typically a little bit farther forward, so you have to worry less about scope bite. But when it comes to a precision rifle like this, I'm not overly worried about scope bite, if I'm brutally honest. I'd much rather get a larger field of view and a larger view looking through it, because if I'm taking shots down range at longer extended distances, which is why, let's be honest, you buy an HPVO, a high-powered variable optic to begin with, I want the most chances of being able to see my target, see my splash, and see what I'm actually hitting. Am I hitting the right target? Can I positively identify the target properly? Well, with both of these, you could do that because the image on both of these is very good. The G3, however, does go up to 36x as opposed to 30x. And as opposed to what we saw with the XRS III, the G3 Razor actually allows us to see much more of the image. We have an extra half a foot field of view at 36x, but again, tie that in with the view looking through the G3, and it really does make for a wonderful, super large, painfully usable experience. And it's one that I cherished when I had it from Nathan, and one that I do miss. I would love to have a G3, but I don't ever think I'll need that much magnification in any scope. Even if I was getting into super precision stuff, maybe if I was going extended long ranges like 1,000 yards plus, but the max I've been able to shoot at to recently is 600 yards, and I could do that with 12x for my needs. But that's just, again, a personal preference. If you can justifiably have the need for the extra magnification and the extra capacity that the G3 offers, both with not just magnification, but the overall controls, the fit, the finish, the quality, the extra warranty, because I'm sure Bushnell's fine, but Vortex really does go above and beyond each and every time. But the colors, the contrast, the clarity of the G3 trumps anything that the MPED has to offer, despite the fact the MPED has a lot to offer. The G3 is just a better scope, but it's also much more scope. It's 13 ounces heavier at 45 ounces, and it's also much more expensive, nearly 4 times the price if you were to find it regularly on price. But the lower magnifications is going to have a less usable reticle with the G3 because it sort of like fades away below 8x. But that might not be that important to you because, again, you're shooting at extended long ranges, so you're going to be up above 10 to 15x probably anyway, where it doesn't make that much of a difference. Regularly, you could find these things for around $3,000, which is $1,000 more than when they first came out. They came out like around $2,000. You could find them refurbished for around $2,000, $2,100, and typically they go on sale below $2,500. But is it worth it? In my opinion, I really do think so. I have a lot of trust for the Razor series. I've had Razors for a long time, and they've never let me down. And I highly doubt the G3 is where the Razor series is going to go on the downslope for me. I highly doubt that. The MPED is a wonderful scope. It comes in at a really sweet price point. It's made in China. I would like to at least see the Philippines, but then it would cost well over $1,000 and probably go in the same price bracket as the Tract Toric and the Stryker. Regardless, it would still be the choice I would take over every option we've seen here today, with the exceptions of the G3 if I need something that I can really trust my life to and go to extended ranges, or the PST Gen 2, again, if you have a Gen 2 Razor already sitting on your precision rig and you're looking for a trainer scope. The MPED is wonderful for what it offers for the price point. It offers a lot of great features. It offers really good image quality, really nice glass, despite the fact that it is Chinese, and in a package that isn't really that heavy. It is large, but it does manage to perform very well from its minimum to its maximum in almost all environments, with the caveat that the 30X isn't as perfect as I would like. But again, given the price point, it still performs better than some of the other options we've looked at the 30X magnification range. So what could you really fault this thing for? If you're looking to get into a precision HPVO for under $1,000, this is a really compelling argument. Everything about it performs as good as I would hope for the price. In fact, maybe even a little bit better. And you've seen that for yourself firsthand. There are some options that are, well, competitive options, but you're going to be giving and taking certain things going from one to the next. The most notable comparison that I've really made here is with the PST Gen 2. A lot of people say this absolutely just defecates all over the PST Gen 2. And in some ways it does. It's got some nicer features that, in my opinion, are valued for me and for a lot of shooters. But in other areas, it might not be as strong of an argument for some of the talking points I made during that comparison. So does this beat the PST Gen 2 flat out? No, I don't think so. But I really do think it's a very healthy competitor to the PST Gen 2, and that only gives us better options for us if we're shopping. So is it a bad thing that we have competitors that come to market that are in a more competitive price point that offer such great features like this MPED versus something as tried and true as the PST Gen 2? I think it's a wonderful thing, because this might appease to a lot more people than the PSG Gen 2 or vice versa. And the more options we have, the better, because all that does is drive innovation up and hopefully prices down. So with that, a huge thank you to the individual that sent this in. I had been painfully waiting to get my hands on one of these. It is perhaps the most impressive scope I've gotten behind this year, and that's saying a lot. I've gotten behind a lot of really great glass this year. But for the price in the sub $1,000 HPVO budget category, holy hell, this is a serious contender. So with that, hopefully you found this video useful. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. I haven't said that in like a year and a half, but it would be nice to see my subscriber base go up a little bit, because with this new algorithm setup, it really sucks watching my numbers sort of dwindle. But guess what? I'm still going to do this because I still love and enjoy doing it, and I know a lot of you out there really appreciate it. So with that, a huge thank you for all of you for watching. And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.